I sat at our dining room table, staring at the cold chicken parmesan that I'd spent 2 hours preparing. The candles had burned down to stubs, and the wine was warm in my glass. It was our 10th wedding anniversary, and my husband Job was nowhere to be found. Working late again, he'd texted me at 6 o'clock, just as I was putting the finishing touches on our special dinner. The same excuse he'd been using for months. I'd set the table with our good china, bought a new dress, even gotten my hair done that afternoon. All for nothing. When the front door finally creaked open at midnight, I was still sitting there in my anniversary dress, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. Job stumbled in, loosening his tie, and I immediately caught a whiff of something that made my stomach turn. Perfume. Sweet, flowery perfume that definitely wasn't mine. "Hey babe, sorry I'm so late," he said, not even looking at the elaborate dinner setup. "Big client emergency. You know how it is." I knew how it was, all right. But I wasn't ready to face what I really knew. Not yet. The next morning, I was doing laundry when Job's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He was in the shower, and normally I wouldn't even glance at his messages. But something made me look. The text notification lit up the screen, and my heart stopped. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. When can we do it again?" The sender's name made my blood run cold, Melissa. Melissa. My best friend since college. My maid of honor. The godmother to our son Jamie. The woman I'd trusted with every secret, every fear, every dream for the past 15 years. I stared at that message until the screen went dark, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. There had to be some explanation. Maybe she was talking about a girl's night out I'd forgotten about. Maybe it was meant for someone else. Maybe it was some kind of inside joke I didn't understand. But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew. Deep down in my gut, I knew exactly what that message meant. And it explained so much about the late nights, the distant behavior, the perfume smell that had become a regular occurrence. My legs felt weak as I sank into a kitchen chair, still holding his phone. For the rest of that day, I walked around in a fog of denial. Every time doubt crept into my mind, I pushed it away. There had to be a logical explanation. Melissa and I had been friends for 15 years. She'd been there for me through everything, my mother's death, Jamie's difficult birth, my struggles with postpartum depression. She wouldn't do this to me. And Job? Sure, we'd been going through a rough patch lately, but that was normal for couples with young kids and demanding careers. Every marriage had its ups and downs. That didn't mean he was cheating, especially not with my best friend. I kept replaying the text message in my head, trying to find innocent meanings. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. Maybe Melissa was helping Job with something work-related. Maybe I'd misunderstood completely. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself that I was being paranoid. When Job came home at a normal time and suggested we order pizza and watch a movie, I felt relieved. See? Everything was fine. I was just letting my imagination run wild. But as we sat on the couch together, his phone kept buzzing with messages he quickly silenced. And when I caught him smiling at his screen, that sick feeling returned to my stomach. The next morning at breakfast, everything changed. I was making coffee while Job read the newspaper at our kitchen table. Jamie was eating cereal and chattering about his upcoming soccer game. "Pass the sugar, Mel," Job said without looking up from his paper. The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. Job looked up, startled by the noise. "What happened?" he asked, seeming genuinely confused. "You called me Mel," I said quietly, my heart hammering in my chest. His face went pale. "No, I didn't," I said. "I asked for the sugar." But I'd heard it clearly. Mel. Melissa's nickname. The name only her closest friends used. The name that had apparently become so familiar to my husband that it slipped out when he meant to say my name. I cleaned up the broken mug in silence while Job retreated behind his newspaper again. Jamie kept chattering about soccer, oblivious to the tension crackling between his parents. For the first time since finding that text message, I stopped trying to find innocent explanations. My husband had just called me by my best friend's nickname. That wasn't something you could explain away. That evening, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed my own husband. When Job said he was going to the office to catch up on some paperwork, I waited 10 minutes and then got in my car. My hands were trembling as I drove through our neighborhood, staying far enough behind that he wouldn't notice me. I felt sick to my stomach, hoping desperately that he really was going to work, that I was being crazy and paranoid. But Job didn't turn toward downtown where his office was located. Instead, he drove straight to Melissa's neighborhood. I watched from the end of her street as he pulled into her driveway like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He didn't knock on the front door like a friend would. He had his own key. I sat in my car, staring at Melissa's house with my husband's car in the driveway, and felt my entire world crumble. There was no denying it anymore. No innocent explanation. No misunderstanding. My husband and my best friend were having an affair. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling with questions. How long had this been going on? Did other people know? Had I been the fool that everyone pitted behind my back? When Job came home 3 hours later, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything except what I'd seen. The next day, while Job was at work and Jamie was at school, I drove to Melissa's house. I had to confront her. I had to hear the truth from her mouth. When she opened the door, she looked surprised to see me. "Hey. What brings you by?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past her into the living room. She closed the door slowly, and when she turned around, her expression had changed. The fake surprise was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. "You finally figured it out," she said, crossing her arms. It wasn't a question. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Melissa shrugged, like we were discussing the weather. 10 years, give or take. 10 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's our entire marriage." She smirked, and I saw a coldness in her eyes that I'd never noticed before. "Pretty much. You were always so trusting, so naive. It was almost too easy." My knees felt weak. I sank onto her couch, the same couch where I'd cried to her about my marriage problems, where I'd confided my fears and insecurities. She'd been sleeping with my husband the entire time. As I sat in Melissa's living room, memories came flooding back with sickening clarity. My wedding day, 10 years ago. Melissa had been my maid of honor, standing right beside me as I promised to love Job forever. She'd helped me get dressed, fix my veil, held my bouquet. "Were you already sleeping with him on my wedding day?" I asked. Melissa's smile was cruel. "Actually, we hooked up the night before. Right after your rehearsal dinner." I felt like I was going to throw up. While I'd been excitedly preparing to marry the love of my life, my best friend and my fiancé were together. She'd stood next to me at the altar, knowing she'd been with him hours before. "How could you do that to me?" I whispered. "Do what?" "Take what I wanted. You had everything handed to you, the perfect family, the perfect house, the perfect husband. Did you really think you deserved all of that?" Her words cut deep because I recognized the jealousy that had apparently been festering for years. I'd never noticed it before, but now I could see it clearly. Every time I'd shared good news, every time I'd been happy, she'd been seething underneath her supportive friend act. "So you decided to steal my husband?" "I didn't steal anything. He came to me willingly. Again and again and again." That night, while Job was working late again, I searched through his things. I felt like a detective investigating my own life, looking for clues I'd been too blind to see before. In the back of his closet, hidden behind old suits, I found a shoebox filled with evidence of his double life. Receipts from expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel bills from weekends when he'd claimed to be on business trips. Concert tickets for shows he'd supposedly attended with work colleagues. But the worst were the photos. Pictures of Job and Melissa on romantic getaways, looking like a real couple. Beach photos from a trip he'd told me was a boring work conference. Christmas photos from last year when he'd supposedly been visiting his sick aunt. I sat on our bedroom floor, surrounded by proof of their decade-long affair, and felt completely numb. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every weekend work emergency, it had all been lies. My entire marriage had been built on a foundation of deception. The photos showed a side of Job I rarely saw anymore. He looked happy, relaxed, genuinely in love. When was the last time he'd looked at me like that? When was the last time he'd taken me anywhere romantic or special? I realized I'd been living with a stranger who was saving his real self for another woman. The memory that hurt most was Jamie's baptism 3 years ago. Melissa had been chosen as his godmother, standing right there in church as we promised to raise our son in faith and love. I remembered how honored I'd felt to have my best friend play such an important role in my child's life. Now I understood what that day really was. While I'd been focused on the spiritual significance of the ceremony, Melissa had been standing next to my husband, probably thinking about their secret relationship. She hadn't been blessing my son, she'd been mocking me in front of our entire family and church community. I thought about all the times she'd babysat Jamie, all the family dinners she'd attended, all the holidays she'd spent with us. She'd inserted herself into every important moment of our lives while secretly destroying our marriage from the inside. The worst part was how Jamie adored her. Aunt Mel was one of his favorite people. He had no idea that his beloved godmother was the reason his family was falling apart. How many other people knew? How many family gatherings had I attended where people were whispering behind my back about the obvious affair I was too stupid to notice? I felt humiliated, betrayed, and completely alone. The two people I'd trusted most in the world had been conspiring against me for a decade. When I finally confronted Job directly, his reaction was exactly what I expected from a coward. He didn't deny it, he couldn't, not with all the evidence I'd found. Instead, he tried to justify it. "You were always so busy with Jamie," he said, not even able to look me in the eye. "You stopped paying attention to me. I needed someone who actually cared about what I was going through." The blame shifting was breathtaking. According to Job, our marriage problems were my fault. I'd apparently driven him into another woman's arms by being too focused on our child. "So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to cheat for 10 years? It wasn't supposed to go on this long," he mumbled. "It just happened. Nothing just happens for 10 years. 10 years of choices, 10 years of lies, 10 years of betraying the woman who'd loved him unconditionally. With my best friend, Job. Of all the women in the world, you chose my best friend." He shrugged helplessly. "She understood me. She listened to me. She made me feel important." I stared at this man I'd been married to for a decade and realized I didn't know him at all. The Job I'd fallen in love with wouldn't have done this. Or maybe he would have, and I'd just been too naive to see it. If this story is hitting close to home, make sure to subscribe for more real-life stories of betrayal and revenge. Instead of screaming, crying, or throwing him out immediately, I did something that surprised even me. I smiled and told him I forgave him. "Everyone makes mistakes," I said calmly. "If you end it with Melissa right now, we can work through this." The relief on his face was pathetic. He actually believed I was going to let him off the hook that easily. He promised to cut all contact with Melissa immediately and suggested we start marriage counseling. For the next few weeks, I played the role of the forgiving wife perfectly. I cooked his favorite meals, smiled when he came home, and acted like everything was back to normal. Job seemed to think he'd gotten away with it. But I wasn't forgiving him. I was planning. Late at night, while he slept peacefully beside me, I researched divorce lawyers. I gathered financial documents, made copies of everything, and started building my case. I documented every lie he'd told, every time he'd claimed to be working when he was really with her. Job had no idea that his loving, trusting wife was methodically preparing to destroy his life. He thought I was too weak and dependent to leave him. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. While going through our financial records for the divorce preparation, I discovered another layer of betrayal. Thousands of dollars had been transferred from our joint savings account to an account I didn't recognize. When I traced the account number, my blood boiled. Job had been giving Melissa money. Our money. Money that was supposed to be for Jamie's college fund, for our retirement, for our family's future. He'd bought her jewelry, paid for her car repairs, even covered her rent when she was between jobs last year. I remembered when she'd told me about her mysterious benefactor, who was helping her through tough times. I'd been so happy for her, thinking she'd found some wealthy boyfriend. It was my own husband. Using my own money. I calculated the total amount, over $30,000 in the past 2 years alone. Money that could have paid off our credit cards, covered Jamie's medical expenses when he broke his arm, or funded the family vacation we'd had to cancel because we couldn't afford it. While I'd been clipping coupons and shopping at discount stores, my husband was funding his mistress's lifestyle with our savings. While I'd been wearing the same clothes for years and getting my hair cut at cheap salons, Melissa was living it up on my dime. The financial betrayal felt almost worse than the emotional one. 2 days later, while I was getting the mail, my neighbor Mrs. Green approached me with an uncomfortable expression. "Honey, I need to tell you something," she said, glancing around nervously. I probably should have said something sooner, but I didn't know how. My heart sank. "What is it?" "I've been seeing your husband sneaking into Melissa's car for years. In our driveway, in the grocery store parking lot, at the school pickup line. I always wondered why they thought no one would notice. Years. Even our elderly neighbor had known about the affair while I remained clueless." Mrs. Green went on to describe specific incidents she'd witnessed, Job and Melissa kissing in her car, holding hands while walking to his office, even arguing like a couple outside the coffee shop downtown. "I'm so sorry, dear. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want to be the bearer of bad news." I thanked her for finally speaking up, but inside I was mortified. If Mrs. Green had seen them together publicly, how many other people knew? How many neighbors, friends, and acquaintances had been watching my marriage fall apart while I smiled and pretended everything was perfect? I felt like the entire town had been pitying me behind my back for years. The thought made me physically sick. That's when I decided on the perfect revenge. I was going to expose them both, publicly and completely, in a way that would humiliate them as much as they'd humiliated me. I planned a family barbecue for the following weekend. Nothing unusual, we'd hosted plenty of backyard gatherings before. I invited Melissa and her husband Daniel, along with a few other close friends and family members. Job seemed pleased that I was moving forward and rebuilding my friendship with Melissa. He had no idea what I was really planning. I spent the week preparing everything carefully. I cleaned the house, planned the menu, and sent cheerful invitations to everyone. On the surface, it looked like a normal family gathering. But I had a very different agenda. The whole week, I watched Job and Melissa try to act normal around each other when Daniel was present. They thought they were being subtle, but now that I knew what to look for, their secret glances and coded conversations were obvious. Poor Daniel had no idea his wife was having an affair with his friend. He actually helped Job set up tables in our backyard, completely oblivious to the fact that Job was sleeping with his wife. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I spent that week gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I made copies of the hotel receipts, printed out bank statements showing the money transfers, and collected all the photos I'd found in Job's closet. But I wanted more than just physical evidence. I wanted something undeniable, something they couldn't explain away or minimize. That's when I remembered Job's voicemail from last month. He'd called me while I was in the grocery store, but I'd missed the call. When I listened to the voicemail later, I'd been confused because he seemed to be talking to someone else. Now I understood. He'd accidentally called my number instead of Melissa's, and the voicemail had recorded him talking to her. "Hey Mel, I miss you already. Last night was incredible. I can't wait to get away from my family and be with you again. At the time, I'd convinced myself I'd misheard it or that it was some kind of joke I didn't understand. Now I realized it was a smoking gun. I saved the voicemail and added it to my evidence collection. By Friday night, I had everything I needed to expose their affair in the most devastating way possible. The barbecue was going to be very interesting. Saturday afternoon arrived with perfect weather. Our backyard filled up with friends and family, and I played the role of the gracious hostess perfectly. I smiled, served drinks, and made small talk while my stomach churned with anticipation. Melissa arrived with Daniel, acting like nothing had changed between us. She hugged me like we were still best friends and complimented my potato salad. The audacity was breathtaking. Job grilled burgers and chatted with the other husbands, occasionally catching Melissa's eye when he thought no one was looking. They really believed they were getting away with it. Jamie ran around the yard with the other kids, completely innocent and happy. I watched him play and felt a surge of protective anger. These two selfish people had been putting my son's family at risk for his entire life. As we sat down to eat, I looked around the table at all the unsuspecting faces. Daniel was laughing at something Job had said, completely unaware that his dinner companion was sleeping with his wife. My parents were there, my sister, Job's brother, all people who loved and trusted us. In a few minutes, their world was going to be turned upside down too. After dinner, I stood up and tapped my wine glass to get everyone's attention. I have something I want to share with all of you, I announced with a bright smile. I walked over to our outdoor TV and turned it on. I've been putting together some old videos and photos, and I found something really interesting. The first thing that appeared on the screen was a video I'd taken with my phone the week before. I'd followed Job to one of his secret meetings with Melissa and recorded them kissing passionately in her car in a parking lot. The reaction was immediate. Daniel's fork clattered to his plate. My mother gasped. Job went completely white, and Melissa's fake smile vanished instantly. Wait, there's more, I said cheerfully, as if I was sharing pleasant vacation photos instead of evidence of adultery. The next video showed them holding hands while walking into a hotel. Then another of them at a restaurant, looking like a real couple on a romantic date. The silence around the table was deafening. I could hear children laughing in the distance, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding among the adults. Job started to stand up, but I held up my hand. Sit down. We're not finished yet. The adults around the table sat frozen, staring at the evidence of betrayal playing out on the screen. Daniel hadn't moved since his fork hit the plate. He was staring at the TV like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. My parents looked shocked and confused. My sister had her hand over her mouth. Job's brother was staring back and forth between Job and the screen with an expression of disgust. Melissa finally found her voice. Turn that off right now, she hissed at me. Not yet, I replied calmly. Everyone should see what kind of people you really are. The final video was the most damning. I'd managed to record them through Melissa's living room window the night before, and the footage was crystal clear. They were cuddled up on her couch, talking about their plans to spend the weekend together while I was supposedly visiting my sister. When the videos ended, I turned to face the table full of shocked faces. Job was staring at his hands, unable to look at anyone. Melissa was glaring at me with pure hatred. Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. How long? Nobody answered him, so I did. 10 years. Their entire affair has lasted 10 years. Since before Job and I got married. The truth hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. I walked back to the table and placed a manila folder in front of each adult. These contain copies of everything, I announced. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, bank transfers, text messages, and photographs. I want everyone to see exactly who these people really are. My father opened his folder first and immediately closed it again, his face red with anger. My mother was crying quietly as she flipped through the evidence. Job's brother was shaking his head in disbelief. Daniel was reading everything methodically, his face getting paler with each page. When he reached the bank statements showing Job had been giving Melissa money, He looked up at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before. "You've been taking money from him?" Daniel asked. "Our financial problems, your inability to keep a job, the debt you've been hiding from me, it's because you've been depending on him instead of working?" Melissa didn't answer. She was still glaring at me like this was somehow my fault. I placed one final item on the table. A printed transcript of Job's accidental voicemail. "In case anyone thinks this might be some kind of misunderstanding," I said, "here's my husband in his own words, talking about how much he loves spending time with my best friend and how he can't wait to get away from his family." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I turned to Job, who was still sitting there looking like a deer in headlights. "Now would be a good time to tell Daniel the truth," I said firmly. "All of it." Job looked around the table at all the disappointed faces staring back at him. His parents, his brother, my family, everyone was waiting for him to speak. "Tell him," I repeated. "Or I'll tell him myself, and trust me, my version won't be nearly as kind as yours." Tears started running down Job's face. His voice was shaky when he finally spoke. "It's true. Everything she's showing you is true. Melissa and I have been together for 10 years. The words seemed to physically hurt Daniel. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath before speaking. "My wife and my friend have been having an affair for 10 years, Daniel said slowly, like he was trying to make sense of the words. "While I've been working overtime to pay our bills, she's been supported by another man. While I've been faithful and honest, she's been lying to my face every single day." Job nodded miserably. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Daniel's voice was getting louder. "You're sorry? You destroyed 2 marriages and you're sorry?" Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward. 10 years, he said, his voice breaking. 10 years of marriage, and it was all a lie." He looked at Melissa with an expression of complete devastation. "Did you ever love me at all? Or was I just the convenient husband while you were really with him?" Melissa finally spoke, but instead of apologizing or showing remorse, she got defensive. "You don't understand how complicated this is," she said. "You can't just reduce it to complicated?" Daniel interrupted. "There's nothing complicated about adultery. There's nothing complicated about stealing money from your husband to give to your lover. There's nothing complicated about lying for 10 years. He picked up the folder of evidence and walked toward the house. "I'm calling my lawyer," he announced. "And my brother who's a divorce attorney. I want you out of my house by tomorrow." The slam of our front door was so loud that the children in the yard stopped playing to look around. Job's brother got up and followed Daniel inside, probably to make sure he was okay. The remaining adults sat in uncomfortable silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Melissa finally exploded. She stood up and pointed an accusing finger at me. "You ruined everything," she screamed. "You vindictive, jealous witch. You couldn't stand that he chose me over you." The mask had completely fallen off. This was the real Melissa, not the supportive friend I'd known for 15 years, but a selfish, cruel woman who felt entitled to steal my husband and destroy my marriage. "I ruined everything?" I responded calmly. "I'm not the one who chose to have an affair. I'm not the one who lied for 10 years. I'm not the one who stole money from their spouse to fund a secret relationship. He was never really yours," she shouted. "He's been mine longer than he was ever yours." My mother gasped at the cruelty of those words. Even Job looked shocked by Melissa's viciousness. "You're right," I said. "He wasn't really mine. Because a real husband doesn't cheat for 10 years. A real husband doesn't steal from his family to support his mistress. A real husband doesn't lie to his wife every single day. So you can have him. You deserve each other." Melissa grabbed her purse and stormed toward the gate. "This isn't over," she hissed at me. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's completely over." After the last guest left, it was just Job and me in our backyard, surrounded by the wreckage of what used to be our life. The children had been taken inside by my sister, sparing them from witnessing their father's humiliation. I walked into our bedroom and pulled out the suitcase I'd packed for him the night before. Everything he owned was neatly folded inside, along with a list of hotels where he could stay. "You won't be sleeping here tonight," I said, setting the suitcase down in front of him. "Or any other night." Job looked at the suitcase like he couldn't believe this was really happening. "Can't we talk about this? Try to work it out." "Work what out?" 10 years of lies? 10 years of cheating? $30,000 of stolen money? Exactly which part of that do you think we can work out? He sat down heavily on our bed, the bed where he'd lied next to me every night while thinking about another woman. "I know I messed up, but we have a son together. We have a history. We have a son together, which is exactly why I'm not going to let him grow up thinking this kind of behavior is acceptable." "And our history?" "Our history is a lie. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage was fiction." I handed him his car keys. "Leave now, or I'll call the police and have you removed." Job picked up his suitcase with shaking hands and walked toward the door. First thing Monday morning, I was at my lawyer's office with a folder full of evidence. The divorce papers were filed by noon, citing adultery and financial misconduct. I'd already spoken to the bank about freezing our joint accounts and preventing any further unauthorized transfers. My lawyer was impressed by the thoroughness of my documentation. "Most people don't have this much proof," he said. "Your case is going to be very straightforward." I filed for full custody of Jamie, citing Job's decade of deception as evidence that he couldn't be trusted to put our son's welfare first. The financial records showing he'd stolen from our family savings would support my case for maximum child support and alimony. Job's lawyer called that afternoon, asking if we could work something out without going to court. Apparently, Job was concerned about the public nature of a trial and how it might affect his career. "Tell him he should have thought about that before cheating for 10 years, I told my lawyer. I also filed a police report about the financial theft. Even though Job was my husband, he transferred money from joint accounts without my knowledge or consent to support his affair. That was grounds for criminal charges." By the end of the week, Job had been served with divorce papers, restraining orders, and a criminal investigation notice. 6 months later, I was sitting in my lawyer's office signing the final divorce decree. Job had agreed to all my terms rather than face a public trial where all his dirty laundry would be aired in court. I got the house, full custody of Jamie, half of Job's retirement accounts, and substantial monthly support payments. He also had to pay restitution for the money he'd stolen from our family savings. Most importantly, Jamie was thriving. Once the initial shock wore off, he seemed relieved not to live in a house full of tension and lies. Job had supervised visitation twice a month, which was more than enough. As for Melissa and Daniel, their divorce had been even messier than mine. Daniel had taken my evidence and hired a ruthless attorney who'd left Melissa with almost nothing. She'd had to move back in with her parents and find a real job for the first time in years. I heard through mutual friends that Job and Melissa had tried to make their relationship work once their affairs became public, but without the excitement of sneaking around, they'd quickly discovered they had nothing in common. They'd broken up within 3 months. Now they were both alone, bitter, and broke while I was building a new life with my son. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting terrible people face the consequences of their choices. If this story of justice and revenge resonated with you, please don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the truth really does set you free, even when it hurts. Thanks for watching.